It was just before sunrise in Oxford, 2016. The city was quiet, but at a luxury penthouse in Scholars Mews, detectives from Thames Valley Police were moving in. With a single command, the battering ram struck. The door splintered. Officers flooded inside. Behind the polished floors and designer furniture, they found the truth: stacks of cash hidden behind false panels, a bulletproof vest laid neatly beside a bed, and a hydraulic press coated in cocaine residue. For months, surveillance teams had watched every move, tracing the trail of money and drugs that led straight to one man, Khalad Uddin. He wasn't a street dealer. He lived among Oxford's elite. The neighbors saw a quiet, respectable young man with a Ferrari in the driveway and no reason to question how he earned it. But behind that image was a multi-million-pound cocaine empire that stretched from London to the Midlands. And on this cold morning, it was all coming to an end. Most people will hear this story after it's too late to understand how it began. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now and stay one step ahead. Khalad Uddin was born and raised in Oxford, a local boy from a quiet, working-class family. To anyone who knew him, he was polite, reserved, and unremarkable. He had no criminal record, no known associations with gangs, and no reason for police to take notice. In the early years, Uddin blended easily into North Oxford's calm, professional community. He kept to himself, drove modest cars, and lived what appeared to be a normal life. But behind the calm exterior, a transformation was beginning. By his late 20s, neighbors began to whisper. The quiet young man was now living in a luxury apartment at Scholars Mews, worth around £3,000 a month, with designer clothes, high-end cars, and late-night visitors who came and went without conversation. No one knew exactly what he did for a living, but everyone noticed how quickly his fortune had changed. And as police would later reveal, the same streets that defined Oxford's respectability had become part of a major drug corridor linking London, Oxford, and the West Midlands. By 2014, the quiet Oxford man had begun to change. Khalad Uddin was now moving in very different circles, ones that stretched far beyond his city. It started in London. Sources later confirmed that Uddin made early contact with Albanian traffickers, men already known to the National Crime Agency for operating import routes into the UK. Among them was Erald Mema, a quiet but influential figure in the European cocaine trade. Mema's network specialized in moving bulk quantities from the Albanian ports of Durrës and Vlora, through Western Europe, and finally into Britain, hidden inside lorries and shipping containers. Somewhere within that network, Uddin found his place. He wasn't a smuggler or a courier, he was a connector. His Oxford base sat perfectly between London and Birmingham, a strategic midpoint that allowed him to distribute cocaine quickly across the South and Midlands while keeping his hands seemingly clean. At first, his profits were modest. Small deliveries, low risk. But greed grows quietly. Within months, his spending exploded: car rentals, short leases on expensive flats, and luxury clothes bought in cash. In one 3-month window, he burned through more than £62,000. It didn't take long for someone to notice. Thames Valley Police analysts began to flag his spending against his declared income, which didn't come close to matching. Behind the scenes, a picture was forming: a man with no clear job, moving large sums of money, and living far beyond his means. But what police didn't yet know was how deeply connected he had become. Surveillance teams later discovered that Uddin wasn't acting alone. Regular trips to London brought him into contact with figures already linked to organized importation networks. Every meeting took place in neutral locations: car parks, cafes, and motorway service stations. No phones, no records, just quiet exchanges. Each time, he came back to Oxford with more confidence and more cash. Then came the first real mistake. A neighbor at Scholars Mews reported unusual activity: cars arriving late at night, visitors staying just minutes before leaving. It was enough for officers to begin quiet surveillance. They installed cameras on nearby lamp posts, tracked vehicle registrations, and built a file that would soon reveal the beginnings of a national trafficking network. By 2015, Khalad Uddin's quiet rise had become something else entirely. What police would later uncover wasn't just a gang, it was a business. Structured, disciplined, ruthlessly efficient. The Albanian network, directed by Erald Mema, was the foundation. From ports in Belgium and the Netherlands, cocaine arrived in the UK through routes controlled by Albanian and Balkan syndicates, often hidden inside legitimate cargo. Once inside London, Mema's team ensured it was stored, cut, and distributed to trusted partners. One of those partners was Uddin. Oxford became his headquarters. From the outside, it looked like a life of quiet success: new cars, designer watches, weekend trips abroad. But inside his Scholars' Muse apartment, the phone never stopped buzzing. Uddin had become the national link between importers and mid-level distributors. He wasn't on the street corners. He was the man connecting the dots. To move product across the Midlands, Uddin needed men who understood the roads, and that's where Craig Davies entered the picture. Davies, 29, from Kingswinford in the West Midlands, was already known to police. He'd built a reputation as a seasoned dealer with deep local contacts. To Uddin, he was the perfect bridge, a man who could push weight quickly, keep quiet, and collect cash without questions. Davies didn't work alone. He brought in a small, trusted team: David Stokes, James Bishop, Jamie Green, and Callum Bradley. Each had a role: storage, transport, distribution, or security. Together, they became known among investigators as the Kingswinford Crew. Money moved fast. Cocaine purchased for £35,000 a kilo was resold for nearly triple that amount once it reached the Midlands. Purity levels often exceeded 90%, proof of direct import access. Police surveillance would later show the same pattern repeated week after week. At first glance, it all seemed ordinary: quick exchanges between men in high-visibility vests, industrial vans parked beside petrol pumps, and handshakes that lasted seconds. But when detectives began tracking vehicle movements and phone pings, they realized what they were really watching were million-pound deals in motion. Still, the operation ran like clockwork. Every shipment accounted for, every courier rotated, every risk anticipated. For nearly 2 years, Uddin's network moved quietly beneath the surface of normal life, through Oxford's cobbled lanes and Birmingham's warehouses, across backroads and laybys, right under the eyes of the public. But behind that calm efficiency, cracks were beginning to show. A courier's car was stopped for speeding near Banbury. Inside, officers found traces of cocaine on the back seat, not enough to charge, but enough to log. Weeks later, an encrypted phone seized in London contained contact numbers linked to both Uddin and Davies. By late 2015, Operation Stingray was officially underway. Covert teams began tracking every call, every meeting, and every mile. Cameras captured Uddin and Mema meeting outside a Starbucks in Summertown, the first time both halves of the empire were seen together. The footage was clear. One man handled importation. The other handled distribution. And with that connection, detectives realized what they were really up against: not a street gang, but a corporate-scale drug empire operating with precision and fear. What came next would shake Oxford's criminal underworld and expose the hidden machinery that powered it. By early 2016, Khalad Uddin was no longer just a name on a police file, he was the center of an empire. What began as small, careful deals had evolved into a multi-million-pound operation stretching across London, Oxford, and the West Midlands. Behind closed doors, Uddin lived like royalty. A red Ferrari parked outside his Oxford apartment, Rolex watches on his wrist, and designer clothes with price tags still attached. His rent alone, £3,000 a month, was paid in cash. On the surface, he was a young man enjoying success. But no legitimate business could explain the fortune moving through his accounts. The real picture, uncovered later by Thames Valley Police and the National Crime Agency, revealed a hierarchy built on discipline, fear, and precision. The Albanian overseers, led by Erald Mema, controlled supply. Uddin managed distribution. Beneath them, layers of couriers and dealers moved product and cash like a logistical chain. Vehicles were fitted with hidden compartments and custom-built hydraulic presses for repacking cocaine. Burner phones rotated weekly. Addresses shifted constantly. Nothing left a trace. In February 2016, Operation Stingray was formally launched. It was one of the largest coordinated investigations Thames Valley Police had ever mounted, involving over 120 officers across multiple regions, working hand in hand with the National Crime Agency. Surveillance teams were deployed around Scholars Mews. Cameras were hidden in streetlights, cars were tagged with trackers, and undercover units followed movements between Oxford, London, and the Midlands. For weeks, detectives watched as Uddin's luxury lifestyle continued untouched. They captured routine meetings, quiet handovers, and late-night drives. But one encounter would change everything. Footage later played in court showed Uddin meeting Erald Mema outside a Starbucks in Summertown, Oxford. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. No words were recorded, no phones were used, but to investigators, it was enough. The import boss and the distributor had been caught together. The two halves of the network had finally merged into one frame. From that moment, Operation Stingray shifted focus. Every delivery was tracked. Every associate was followed. Every shadow had a name. Detectives watched. They waited. Every phone ping, every fuel receipt, every handshake outside a car park, documented, logged, and cross-checked. If you think stories like this can't happen where you live, think again. The next bust could be on your street. Hit subscribe, and don't stay in the dark. By mid-2016, cracks had begun to form in Khalad Uddin's empire. For months, Operation Stingray had gathered every call, every sighting, and every coded message. But detectives needed one thing: a direct link between Uddin and the violent undercurrent of his trade. That link came in August 2016. Intelligence from the National Crime Agency flagged a suspected firearms deal unfolding in Kingswinford, West Midlands, an area already tied to Uddin's network through Craig Davies and his so-called Kingswinford crew. Surveillance teams moved quietly, blending into car parks and service stations. They weren't looking for drugs this time, they were hunting for guns. Two names soon emerged: Sadiqat Ali and Gerald Simpson, both trusted hands within the Oxford Midlands route. Ali had been seen meeting couriers connected to Davies. Simpson, a known associate, was already on the police radar for handling large cash transfers. On the night of the operation, undercover officers tailed the pair as they pulled into a dimly lit side street. A shoebox changed hands, ordinary, unmarked, the kind you'd find in any boot sale. But inside were 2 pistols, 12 rounds of live ammunition, and £2,000 in cash. Hidden microphones caught every shuffle, every whispered word. When armed officers closed in, both men were arrested without warning. The shoebox was seized. Forensic teams confirmed the weapons were live and ready for use. At first glance, Uddin's name wasn't anywhere near the scene. But when detectives extracted data from the recovered phones, the truth surfaced. A single message, time-stamped and traced, placed Uddin at the center of the deal. That was enough. It connected the empire's drug distribution directly to illegal firearms, the very escalation police had feared. The tone of the investigation shifted overnight. What began as a drug case was now a matter of armed organized crime. For the first time, Uddin wasn't just a trafficker, he was a public threat. Inside Thames Valley Police headquarters, Operation Stingray moved into its final phase. Whiteboards filled with names. Maps were covered in red pins linking Oxford, London, Birmingham, and Kingswinford. Warrants were signed, schedules drawn, and surveillance teams briefed. They had one objective: dismantle the entire network, simultaneously. October 19, 2016. It was just after 5:30 in the morning when silence across Oxford was shattered. In one coordinated moment, more than 120 officers from Thames Valley Police, the National Crime Agency, and regional organized crime units moved in. It was the culmination of Operation Stingray, months of surveillance, intelligence, and painstaking detective work. 12 addresses were hit simultaneously, stretching from Oxford's Scholars Mews to the West Midlands and suburban London. Doors were breached, lights flashed through the darkness, and suspects were pulled from their beds as detectives swept through luxury flats and quiet cul-de-sacs alike. Inside, investigators uncovered the machinery of an empire. In one Oxford address alone, they discovered over £560,000 in cash, stacked in boxes, bound in elastic, and hidden beneath floorboards. The find would go on record as the largest single cash seizure in Thames Valley Police history. Elsewhere, teams uncovered 10 kilograms of high-purity cocaine, some registering 91% purity, along with firearms, encrypted phones, and anti-surveillance devices designed to detect police tracking equipment. Vehicles contained hidden compartments, professionally engineered cavities concealed behind panels and dashboards, built to carry cash one way and cocaine the other. Every detail painted a clear picture: this wasn't a local drug ring. It was a fully fledged supply network stretching from Albanian ports, through London, and into the English Midlands, with Khalad Uddin at its centre. Forensic specialists traced fingerprints and residue from seized cash and packaging back to couriers in the Kingswinford crew, the West Midlands cell run by Craig Davies, with associates David Stokes, James Bishop, Jamie Green, and Callum Bradley. Every phone contact, vehicle movement, and financial trail connected the same dots. By nightfall, Uddin, Erald Mema, and the entire crew were under arrest. Over the next several months, detectives built the prosecution file that would bring Uddin's empire to its knees. When the case reached Birmingham Crown Court in 2017, it stunned even experienced investigators. Prosecutors detailed how Uddin, once an unassuming Oxford resident, had transformed his rented penthouse into the command centre of a multi-million-pound trafficking network. They described encrypted communications, coded ledgers, and routes that carried drugs worth more than £3.5 million through Oxfordshire alone. The courtroom heard how Albanian importers managed the European supply chain, while Uddin coordinated domestic distribution, ensuring drugs moved quickly, cash moved quietly, and his name stayed clean. But in the end, the evidence was overwhelming. Digital data, phone intercepts, and physical surveillance left no room for doubt. When the verdict came, Uddin stood motionless as the judge read each count aloud. Conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Conspiracy to possess firearms with intent to endanger life. Money laundering. He was found guilty on all charges. The sentence was decisive. 16 years in prison for drug offences. 14 years for firearms offences. To be served concurrently, a total of 16 years behind bars. Under the Proceeds of Crime Act, the court ruled that Uddin's criminal benefit amounted to £2 million, with £541,334 recoverable immediately, money stripped from his frozen accounts, vehicles, and seized assets. As for his associates, the hammer fell just as hard. Across the Midlands, the Kingswinford crew, led by Davies, received a combined total of 150 years in prison. For law enforcement, it was a landmark success, one of the largest collective sentences ever secured under a regional drugs investigation. Footage from police body cameras captured the moment officers led Uddin out of his Oxford penthouse. Gone were the tailored suits, the Rolex, and the calm confidence. In their place stood a man shackled by the very empire he built, his world of cash, cocaine, and control collapsing in front of him. But for detectives, there was one lingering question. If Uddin's network was finished, why did the cocaine supply across Oxfordshire continue almost uninterrupted? Because even as Uddin's empire crumbled, the supply never stopped. East London, 2020. For years after Khalad Uddin's empire crumbled, a quiet cafe on Lee Bridge Road began drawing attention for reasons no one could see from the outside. By day, the Milano cafe looked ordinary. Steaming cups of espresso, regulars chatting at tables, and a man behind the counter with a polite smile. His name was Taulant Stoica, a father of four, known locally as a hard-working businessman. But behind that smile was a new kind of operator, one who had learned from the fall of those before him. Unbeknownst to the public, detectives were already piecing together fragments of encrypted chatter, fragments that pointed toward a new player rising from the ashes of Operation Stingray. When investigators later cracked the EncroChat network under Operation Venetic, one of the aliases that surfaced was Pale Fog. The user behind it? Stoica. Through months of decrypted messages, police uncovered evidence of a man quietly coordinating shipments of cocaine worth more than £1.4 million, routed between London, Bristol, and the Midlands. He spoke in codes, negotiated prices in bulk, and managed payments through trusted couriers. The system was simple, efficient, and nearly invisible, a smaller mirror of the empire that had once thrived under Uddin and the Albanians before him. His closest associate was Muhammad Kosia, his main runner and enforcer. In 2021, Kosia was stopped by armed officers after a surveillance operation. Inside his property, police discovered £23,000 in cash, a loaded firearm, and 11 kilograms of cocaine hidden beneath a child's cot, a chilling sign of how deeply Stoica's operation had embedded itself into ordinary domestic life. That same year, officers moved in on Stoica himself. When they raided his home, they found £16,000 in cash, 3 encrypted phones, and records linking him to multiple large-scale transactions. Once again, a quiet London street had become the centre of a major drug investigation. At Woolwich Crown Court in February 2022, the scale of Stoica's operation was laid bare. Prosecutors described him as an organizer and coordinator in a network moving Class A drugs across southern England. The court heard how, despite the collapse of the Oxford-based empire years earlier, the supply chain had adapted, cleaner, smarter, but just as dangerous. The sentence was swift: 10 years in prison for conspiracy to supply cocaine. But behind the numbers lay a deeper truth. Each generation had learned from the last. From Erald Mema's import routes to Uddin's regional empire to Stoica's encrypted network, the pattern was unmistakable. Even as one syndicate fell, another quietly rose to take its place. And for the detectives who had witnessed Operation Stingray unfold, it was a sobering reminder. Crime doesn't vanish, it evolves. From penthouses to prison cells, their empire moved millions, yet ended in handcuffs. More than 150 years of combined prison time, all built on greed, trust, and the illusion of safety. Hide behind ordinary cafes and quiet homes. If you think this is the end of the story, think again. Somewhere, another network is already moving through the same streets tonight. Don't be the last to know. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and stay alert before the next empire falls.